Okay, should I get started, Jonathan?
Yes, sir.
Good morning. Welcome to the meeting of the Boston Region Metropolitan Planning Organization. I'm Eric Barassa with the Metropolitan Area Planning Council, Vice Chair of the MPO. I'll be starting the meeting this morning while David Moeller with MassDOT is out for a little bit this morning. Let's see. Read the accessibility statement. Is that next? Okay.
Notice of non-discrimination.
Okay, notice of non-discrimination. So you are invited to participate in our transportation planning process regardless of your race, color, national origin, including limited English proficiency, religion, creed, gender, ancestry, ethnicity, disability, age, sex, sexual orientation, gender identity or expression, veteran status, or background. The meeting guidelines: all participants will join the meeting with muted microphones. Please rename yourself to include your first name, last name, and affiliation. After roll call, board members may mute and unmute themselves. Always remain muted unless actively speaking. To participate in the discussion, please select the raised hand function. Find this by clicking either on the participants button at the bottom of the screen, and a window will pop up with a raised hand button at the bottom, or the reactions button in the toolbar. Then the chair will then call on participants. If you are on the phone, you can use the *9 to raise your hand. If you have any technical difficulties, please contact Sean Rourke via the chat box or srourke, SROURKE at ctps.org, or you can call him at 857-702-3693. Accessibility statement. This meeting is accessible to people with disabilities. Zoom products are compliant with exceptions with the following standards: Web Content Accessibility Guidelines 2.1 Level AA standards and revised Section 508 standards. Again, if you require any additional accommodations in order to participate fully in the meeting, please contact Sean Rourke, MPO staff at SROURKE at ctps.org, or call him at 857-702-3693. Okay, let's do introductions. Jonathan, do you want to call the roll?
Certainly. Metropolitan Area Planning Council.
Eric Barassa with MAPC.
Mass DOT seat 2.
John Bashad, representing Highway Administrator Jonathan Gulliver, present.
Thank you. Mass DOT Highway Division.
Mass DOT Highway, John Romano here.
Thank you. MBTA.
Good morning. This is Allie Clayman representing Interim General Manager Jeff Gonville and the MBTA.
Thank you. Massachusetts Port Authority.
Hi, this is Sarah Lee from Massport.
Thank you. MBTA Advisory Board.
Good morning, Brian Kane, MBTA Advisory Board, and Eric, great job on the opening statements.
Regional Transportation Advisory Council.
I'm sorry, I was waiting for the button to ask me to unmute. Hey, so Leonard Diggins on Advisory Council here. Thank you.
Thanks. City of Boston, BTD.
Bill Conroy representing Mayor Wu in the city of Boston.
Thank you. City of Boston, BPDA.
Jim Fitzgerald with BPDA representing Mayor Wu in City of Boston.
Thank you. At large, City of Everett.
Good morning, Jay Monty representing Mayor DeMaria in the city of Everett.
Thank you. At large, City of Newton.
Okay, sorry. David Kozas representing Mayor Ruth Ann Fuller in the city of Newton.
Thank you. At large, Town of Arlington.
I do not see Claire Ricker.
Okay. At large, Town of Brookline.
Good morning, Town of Brookline. Rob King, representing Charles Carey, Town Administrator for Brookline.
Thank you. Intercore Committee, City of Somerville.
I'm not sure if Tom is here, but I'm seeing Bradley.
Then you can let undo Brad Rossin then.
Brad, you should be able to unmute.
Folks, Tom is here to represent us. Can you please unmute him?
Is his name just Tom in this meeting?
Should be
Yes.
just Tom. Yep.
Unmute, unmute, yeah. Thank you, Tom Bent, City of Somerville, representing Mayor Cachiana Ballantyne and Nina Core. And apologize, different computer today, and it's not allowing me to change my name for some reason. Thanks.
Okay, thanks, Tom. Minuteman Advisory Group on Interlocal Coordination, Town of Acton.
I do not see Austin.
Yeah, okay. Metro West Regional Collaborative, City of Framingham.
Dennis Giambetti, representing Metro West Region, and the Mayor Suzuki.
Thank you. North Shore Task Force, City of Beverly.
Darlene Nguyen, representing City of Beverly and North Shore Task Force.
Thank you. North Suburban Planning Council, Town of Burlington.
I do not see Melissa Tantopoulos.
Okay. South Shore Coalition, Town of Hull.
Not seeing Jen Constable.
Okay. Southwest Advisory Planning Committee, Town of Medway.
I do not see Peter Pelletier.
Okay. And Three Rivers Interlocal Council, Town of Norwood, Neponset River Regional Chamber.
Good morning, Tom O'Rourke from the Town of Norwood, representing the Trick subregion.
Thank you. And our ex officio members, Federal Highway Administration.
Good morning, Cassie Ostrander, Federal Highway.
Thank you. And Federal Transit Administration.
Not seeing any representatives.
Okay, that calls the roll, Mr. Chair.
I do see Marissa from the Town of Arlington.
Oh, I'm sorry. Could you unmute Marissa Lau, please?
Hi, sorry about that. Marisa Lau here for Claire Ricker, Town of Arlington.
Thank you.
Thank you all. So we're going to skip the chair's report and we're going to go to the executive director's report. Second.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and welcome everybody. So if we can go just to the next slide, it's just a header slide. But I am here today to make a few significant staffing updates to the board and others joining the meeting today. So we will be seeing 2 departures from our MPO activities group. That's our core kind of group that supports the board and its activities. And the departures are 2 faces and voices whom you know very well. So first, the MPO activities group manager, Jonathan Church, and then also our long-range transportation plan manager, Michelle Scott, will be departing our agency in early March to take on new roles at Mass DOT within the Office of Transportation Planning. So while, of course, this is a huge loss to the MPO, I am very happy to say that we'll continue to work with them as colleagues within OTP. But because both Jonathan and Michelle have been such frequent attendees and presenters at these meetings, and because many of you have worked with them extensively outside of the meetings, I'd like to just take a few minutes to say a few things about their work and then ask you, Mr. Chair, to allow them to address the board. So first, Jonathan, who just did the roll call. After an initial stint with us with the Boston MPO in the early 2000s, when he was actually also managing the TIP, Jonathan rejoined us 14 years later, back in 2020, as the manager of MPO activities. And we're fortunate that when he joined us, he already had experience with the MPO and CTPS, as well as with Central Mass MPO and Worcester RTA, because his first day back with CTPS, with the Boston MPO, was literally our first day officially and formally working from home or working remotely as a result of the pandemic. So starting off with that first odd day, he really did lead the MPO activities team through that very unprecedented transition. And he oversaw the launch of our successful launch of virtual meetings. So many thanks to him in terms of providing his leadership during that challenging time. And I will just say that most of all, I will miss Jonathan's very energetic presence on our team, which has contributed to a culture that we have of very friendly camaraderie, both virtually and in person at CTPS. And then I'd like to say a few things about Michelle. She's with the agency for over 10 years now and has served quite a few important roles that have been central to the success of the MPO. And her career with us has culminated in her leading the development of Destination 2050, which is the long-range transportation plan that's currently in development. And I just wanted to say about Michelle that she's been just an incredible asset, an invaluable asset to the MPO board. And her insight and perspective is something that I've highly valued, both as when I was a board member, but also now in my role as executive director. So I'll miss her thoughtfulness, her transparency, and her really excellent assessment of situations, which has been a contributing factor to the continuous improvement of our agency. So that, Mr. Chair, I'd love to give Jonathan and Michelle a chance to say something to the board.
Absolutely. Jonathan?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I will certainly miss everyone at not only the staff level, but also working with all of you at the MPO board level. As Tega did mention, this is was my second time around at CTPS, and while I am looking forward to moving up to MassDOT to be the manager of transit planning, I will certainly miss all of you and have enjoyed working with you much, and I'm sure that we will be crossing paths again at some point in other capacities. So thank you all for a great 3 years, and I'm sure we'll see each other soon. Thanks.
Awesome. Michelle?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Tegan, for the kind words. I do want to acknowledge that I've been really lucky to have been able to work for the past 10 years with the really thoughtful, mission-driven, creative, and caring people that make up CTPS, both those who have been there for a long time and those who have recently joined the agency. I'm also really grateful for the opportunity I've had to work with you all as board members over the past 10 years. You know, getting to know you all kind of at the beginning of my planning career, I've learned a lot from your experiences and your ideas and your values. And I always deeply admire everything that you bring to being board members. It's such a huge commitment in terms of time and attention. And, you know, it means a lot, you know, as a CTPS staff person and as a resident of the region to see, you know, everything that you bring to these discussions to make this a better place to live. So I hope to continue to work with you all, you know, in my new role at the Office of Transportation Planning, where I'll be helping with the capital investment plan. Thanks so much.
Thank you both. I'm glad you're not going too far. And I just want to say, working with both of you for many years, I really appreciate the really great work that you've done, really helping to, you know, help this group make decisions, providing really great information, clear presentations, and really guiding a lot of the work that the MPO does. So thank you both for all the work that you've done. And I'm really glad that you're not going too far, and we'll continue to see you working on transportation issues in the region. So maybe we can all give everybody a round of applause. Great job, Jonathan, Michelle. Thank you. Let's go to public comments.
Oh, sorry, Mr. Chair. I am not. Are you finished?
Oh, you're not finished. I'm sorry.
No, I'm so sorry. Thank you. Thank you. So if we can go to the next slide, the follow on to that stat announcement is that we do have a number of posted positions that I would very much like the board to be aware of. And I just wanted to say a few things about these positions so that you can help us kind of move forward in this time. So first of all, we have posted, excuse me, the manager of MPO activities. That is the role that Jonathan is currently in, and it's responsible for the core support to the MPO board and the development and delivery of the major federal certification documents. And that's the UPWP, the TIP, and the long range plan. We also have posted for a manager of policy and planning and policy, which is a new position. And this position is intended to take over the leadership of the more continuous planning and performance monitoring activities. So sort of more of the programmatic elements of the core MPO work, including equity, performance-based planning, climate resilience, air quality, as well as the legislative policy and research environment that's so important to support the work that we do. So that's a new manager position with the agency, and we would love to see it filled with somebody who is really passionate about our work. And then we have another newly named position, although it's not a brand new position in of its own right, but it's the manager of multimodal planning and design. The manager will take over a newly named team that's initially made up of the current members of what has been formerly known as the Traffic Analysis and Design Group, or TAD Group. So I know a lot of you are very familiar with the work that they have done kind of as their core products like corridor studies and so on. And we're shifting the name to multimodal planning and design because it is much better reflective of the team's focus on multimodal planning and the emphasis on vulnerable roadway users. And then lastly, of course, we have the program manager role for the long range transportation plan. So while Michelle is leaving us in a few weeks, we are really in the thick of the development of this long range plan. And so we have identified in the interim Bradley Putnam as one of our colleagues as an interim manager for the implementation and completion of the LRTP. So I want to make sure you all are aware of that now. I'm very pleased that Bradley has agreed to take on this very exciting and challenging role on an interim basis. And he's been a very valuable member of our team to date and has really excellent project management skills. So many of you may already know him from his work that he's done with the MBTA and on a number of the MBTA contracts. And we will, of course, be making sure we're bringing in the expertise to ensure that we can also successfully complete the MBTA work that is going on in support of Bradley in his extra responsibilities that he's taking on in the interim. So that is my my update on staffing. And then I usually like to just touch point on what the agenda is for today. There are 3 action items and 2 presentations. So in addition to what you see here in terms of endorsing the current TIPS Amendment 3 and talking about a new work scope about lab and municipal parking, you'll also have the opportunity to approve bridge pavement condition and performance targets. And then that and the following TIP related presentations will really make up the bulk of the meeting, the performance targets and the TIP updates. So Ethan Lapointe will be giving you updates on a number of changes in project readiness and the impacts, particularly on our near-term years of the TIP. So he'll also then follow that with prefacing a brief update from one of the Community Connections shuttle proponents on the performance of the shuttle services that you have already voted to fund for the first year, but that you are also considering the funding for future years as you make decisions in the upcoming MPO meetings. So just to give you that context. And then finally, the last slide is a reminder that the next MPO meeting is scheduled for March 2nd. We will have a number of really important items. Again, we'll expect to have you vote on the endorsement of the the Title VI Triennial Report. We'll also talk about transit asset management performance targets, the TIP project scoring, and then likely for Michelle's last meeting, the long range plans universe of projects. And that, Mr. Chair, concludes my report.
Thank you, Tegan. Are there any questions for Tegan from board members? Okay, so seeing none, let's move to public comments. Are there any public comments today? I see Brad Rawson. I think you can unmute yourself, Brad, but.
Sound check, Chair. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Thank you very much. Chair, a few quick comments. So first, I'd like to also express my personal gratitude and the City of Somerville's gratitude, and therefore the Inner Core's gratitude towards Michelle and Jonathan. Folks, thanks for your great service. And I'm so glad that we will continue to serve the region together in your new roles. Let's never forget the coalitions that we work to maintain and build here. Second, I respectfully encourage this board to support the work scope before you today for lab parking project. I want to note that land use and transportation really are 2 sides of the same coin, and low parking ratios are a great congestion management strategy. Somerville standards for labs these days is 0.6 parking spaces per 1,000 square feet of built product. We'll be happy to work with CTPS staff when appropriate. Regarding TIP readiness, Chair, I'm pleased to report that Mass DOT continues to make progress on the McGrath Boulevard project design, and I'm happy to answer board questions today if helpful. And I'm also really glad to see colleagues from other municipalities who are here to report on their projects. Lastly, Chair, I do not see on the readiness spreadsheet MBTA projects listed. We see a series of Mass DOT projects. And since board members have advocated over the course of multiple TIP cycles for more MBTA and transit projects to be brought to this board earlier and earlier in the TIP process, I'm hoping that we will hear commitments today from MBTA staff to provide shovel-ready projects that serve multiple subregions, not just the inner core. Regional rail, rail electrification, and bus electrification initiatives kind of come to mind as potentially attractive candidates that I think all subregions and all members can get excited about. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Brad. We have an MPO agenda setting meeting tomorrow, so we'll bring that to the agenda setting meeting to discuss. Thank you. Appreciate it. Alex Train.
Great. Thank you. Good morning, members of the board. Thank you for the opportunity to provide public comment this morning on the TIP FY 24 to 28 project readiness update. So my name is Alex. I serve as the Director of Housing and Community Development for the City of Chelsea. The City of Chelsea, with critical support from the Boston MPO, has been advancing the Park and Pearl reconstruction project, which is presently programmed in federal fiscal year 27. Over the course of the last year, we've begun the design process, and we're nearing completion of the 25% design at the end of this summer. We're happy to report that, in accordance with our most recent schedule, we'll be fully completed with 100% design by the end of calendar year 2024. We recognize that the project is going to serve critical school walking routes, manage and mitigate congestion, abate poor air quality, and revitalize a portion of our downtown that's home to over 120 minority-owned small businesses. So we're elated that we're able to proceed with this project. And again, we wanted to express our gratitude to the board for your significant support and financial investments in this project and other projects in Chelsea. Thank you.
Alex, thank you. Are you going to stick around for the TIP readiness presentation, or do you have to leave the meeting?
I'll have to leave, but I have a staff member here, Carl Allen, who will be able to attend.
Are there any members who have a question for Alex about that Park and Pearl Street project? Okay, seeing none, thank you, Alex, that there'll be someone from Chelsea. Appreciate your comments. Thank you. Any other public comments? Okay, I'm not seeing any. So let's move on to the committee chairs report. Derek?
Good morning, and thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to give folks a reminder that the UPWP committee will be meeting today at 1 p.m. To discuss the development timeline for the federal fiscal year 2024 Unified Planning Work Program. So just wanted to give folks a reminder, and then throughout the rest of the next couple months, we'll be discussing potential projects to fund for federal fiscal year 2024. And that cycle sort of kicks off today. So just wanted to mention that briefly. Thank you.
Thank you, Derek. Brian Kane.
Thank you, sir. Just to note, the A&F committee met before this one. We discussed the process for hiring the executive director purely on a theoretical basis, I hasten to add. And we will discuss evaluation and compensation next time, as well as several other things as we continue to develop the operations plan, which will be brought to this board for its consideration sometime this spring, we hope. So thanks very much.
Thank you, Brian. Let's move on to the Regional Transportation Advisory Committee report. Len Diggins.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And so, as others have mentioned, I really appreciate me working with Michelle and Jonathan, and having had a conversation with the executive director on Friday. I understand, why they need to move on to OTP. And even if I didn't, I still congratulate you on doing on moving forward. You're great people, and for whomever you work, we will all benefit in some way, but it is good that you're going to be close by, and I'm sure that we'll be interacting in some way in the near future. So at our last meeting, we had a really great presentation by Betsy Harvey on the equity work that the MPO is doing. And it was a review of what's been done, but also looking forward to what we are going to do as an MPO. And I know I say this a lot, but I really am very impressed with the work that this MPO does on equity, because we go beyond what the feds require that we do. And we're really emphasizing trying to correct or address the past inequities, because we realize that if we simply build, create projects or build plans without trying to address those previous inequities, we're not going to really close the gap as much as we should, and certainly as quickly as we can. So it was a really good presentation. It's recorded, and I think we can also make the presentation slide deck that Betsy presented available, because there's lots of good information in that. And sometimes just seeing it a different time, or maybe a third or fourth time, that helps some elements of it sink in. And we also had a little brainstorming session with Shaleka on the regarding the upcoming UPWP cycle. So it was a good meeting. Thank you.
Thank you, Len. Any questions for Len? Okay, seeing none, let's go on to agenda number 7. The January 19th MPO meeting minutes. Can I get a motion to approve? Brian Kane,
Move approval, please.
can I get a second?
Tom Bent, I'll second.
Great, we have a motion and a second. Jonathan, can you call the roll?
Eric Barassa,
Yes.
John Bouchard,
Bouchard, yes.
John Romano,
John Romano, yes.
Ally Clayman,
Ally Clayman, yes.
Sarah Lee,
Sarah Lee, yes.
Brian Kane,
Brian Kane, yes.
Leonard Diggins,
Leonard Diggins, yes.
Bill Conroy,
Bill Conroy, yes.
Jim Fitzgerald,
Fitzgerald, yes.
Jay Monty, come back. David Kozis,
David Kozis, yes.
Marissa Lau.
Abstain.
Okay. Rob King,
Rob King, yes.
Tom Bent,
Tom Bent, yes.
Dennis Giambetti,
Dennis Giambetti, yes.
Darlene Nguyen.
Darlene Nguyen, yes.
I just want to recognize, Mr. Chair, that Jennifer Constable arrived to the meeting, so I will call her. Jennifer Constable
Jan Constable, yes.
and Tom O'Rourke.
Tom O'Rourke, yes.
Motion carries, Mr. Chair.
Excellent. Thank you, Jonathan. Let's move on to agenda item number 8, action item tip amendment 3. Is that Ethan?
That is Ethan. Thank you, Eric. So good morning, everybody. My name is Ethan Lapointe. I am the Transportation Improvement Program Manager. My first of 3 presentations here today will cover the 3rd amendment to the federal fiscal year 2023 to 27 tip. If we can go on to the next slide, please. And the one after that, please. So just to start off with a brief overview, or rather refresher on the substance of Amendment 3, this was voted on at the January 19th board meeting. Amendment 3 included the proposal for the bundling of the Interstate 90 and Lincoln Street pedestrian overpass bridge project, currently funded with state highway dollars in the Boston Region MPO's tip, with the Alston Multimodal Project. This project is within the Massachusetts State Capital Investment Plan, and therefore, with the bundling of this project, it would leave the tip, but its improvements would still be reflected and carried over in that program. The other inclusion was also a programming of a design earmark for the Center Street Central Avenue Bridge project, which is at the Dover and Needham border. And then the third item was the programming and inclusion of a fair few number of community transit grants for various municipalities, transit providers, and private entities within the Boston region. Community transit grants, as a refresher, are grants provided by the Massachusetts Department of Transportation, not the MPO, to support various community-centered transit issues, including paratransit, demand response, operational funding, etc. So moving on to the next slide, as an amendment, Amendment 3 constituted a 21-day public comment period, which ranged from January 20th, the day after the board voted to open it up for comment, until February 10th. Staff received 2 comments on Amendment 2. Both of these comments expressed support for the community transit grants included in here. However, the first one indicated that there was a need for safer pedestrian infrastructure in their community, being Natick in this case, to make last mile connections to transit centers, and suggested the possibility for a demand response taxi system to be implemented to fulfill that kind of last mile need. In the staff's response, staff suggested that the commenter reach out to their local planning staff to express that need, and indicate that MPO staff would be happy to work with their municipality or any others to devise projects that may resolve these kinds of gaps and could fit into an MPO investment program in the future, should a project be initiated. With all of that in mind, if we can go on to the next slide, please. We are requesting here that the board votes to endorse Amendment 3 and its contents for inclusion in the 23-27 tip.
Thank you, Ethan. Any questions for Ethan on this action? Okay, not seeing any. Can I have a motion to endorse Amendment 3? Brian Kane.
Move to endorse Amendment 3.
Thank you, Brian. Can I have a second?
Tom Bent, I'll second that.
Thank you. Jonathan, please call the roll.
Will do, Mr. Chair. I will note that David Mueller has arrived, as well as Melissa Tentaklis. So why don't I start with you, Mr. Chair, Eric Barassa?
Yes.
David Mueller?
Yes.
Okay. John Bouchard?
John Bouchard, yes.
John Romano?
John Romano, yes.
Ally Clayman?
Ally Clayman, yes.
Sarah Lee?
Sarah Lee, yes.
Brian Kane?
Brian Kane, yes.
Leonard Diggins?
Leonard Diggins, yes.
Bill Conroy?
Bill Conroy, yes.
Jim Fitzgerald?
Gerald, yes.
Jay Monty?
Jay Monty, yes.
David Kozis?
David Kozis, yes.
Marissa Lau?
Wow, yes.
Rob King?
Rob King, yes.
Tom Bent?
Tom Bent, yes.
Dennis Giambetti?
Dennis Giambetti, yes.
Darlene Nguyen?
Darlene Nguyen, yes.
Melissa Tentaklis?
Melissa Tentaklis, yes.
Jennifer Constable?
Jennifer Constable, yes.
And Tom O'Rourke.
Tom O'Rourke, yes.
Motion carries unanimous, Mr. Chair.
That's great. Thank you all. I'm going to pass the chair to David Mueller.
Thank you, Eric. Next item on the agenda is the work scope for the lab and municipal parking study. Rosemary McCarron.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm Rosemary McCarron. I'm the manager of the data analysis and applications team at CTPS, and I'm here to provide a brief overview of the lab and municipal parking study. The Boston region is experiencing a boom in laboratory and life sciences development. With the prices for necessary real estate rising, development in this category has begun to spread from long-standing centers such as Kendall Square in Cambridge to a diverse set of areas across the region. The Metropolitan Area Planning Council and the Central Transportation Planning staff have heard from numerous stakeholders, especially municipal planners across the region, that there is a need for rigorous research to determine parameters for parking regulation for such developments. MAPC and CTPS propose collaborating on a research study to assess regional parking demand and use at commercial and mixed-use developments with a particular focus on lab and life science facilities. The work program consists of 3 main tasks. In the first task, CTPS will review available data on existing and planned lab and life science facilities in the Boston region. We'll examine transportation accessibility at these sites to help inform expected trip generation. We'll also review any available parking-related policies that apply to lab facilities or similar commercial uses. In task 2, we will engage with municipal planners, developers, building managers, and others to gain insight into parking and travel patterns at existing lab and life science facilities. If any of the municipalities or others represented at this meeting today are interested in taking part of these conversations, please feel free to reach out to me. Using the information gathered through these tasks, CTPS will develop a detailed and robust guide for data collection and analysis of parking supply and utilization. The study will result in a technical memorandum that summarizes these findings and recommends a methodology for conducting parking utilization studies at lab and life sciences facilities. We request your approval of this work program and are happy to take questions.
Thank you, Rosemary. Questions from the members? Jim Fitzgerald.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think as everyone would agree, this is very important and timely research, especially with the proliferation of lab uses throughout all of our cities. So, and obviously parking is a big issue to wrestle with and get right. Don't know if this can fit into the work scope or the budget, but another item that would really be helpful to analyze would be the loading needs for lab. Typically, they need a lot more frequent lab loading throughout the day, and oftentimes we hear on multiple bays needing to be incorporated into projects, and obviously in a dense urban environment, those are some of our biggest challenges in working with these types of uses. So don't know if it's needs to be an add-on piece in the future, but I just would kind of lobby for also looking at the loading issues related to lab. So thank you.
Thank you. That's great feedback. And I think we can incorporate that at least in the stakeholder interviews and start to get an idea of how that issue plays into the demand as a whole.
And just to add, be happy to participate and help as needed. So thank you.
Thanks a lot.
Thanks, Rose. Brian King.
Thanks very much. Just wanted to also endorse this. I think it's a great study, certainly needed. I recall one local municipality working on a proposed lab structure that wanted 300 or 400 parking spaces below ground because it thought that's what it needed. So clearly this is definitely something that's very topical, and I certainly encourage my colleagues to support it when the vote comes. Thank you.
Dennis Giambetti. Sorry, Dennis.
So, thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a quick question. Has the communities been identified that's going to participate in this study?
No, that's going to be part of the study to identify the groups that are taking part. I think in the chat, they put my email address. So if you know of communities that are interested in taking part, we're happy to discuss it with them.
Yeah, that'd be great. I just want to make sure that there's some geographic diversity. So the issues that in some communities may be different than in larger inner core communities. So I just wondering if that was going to be part of the study.
Yeah, part of the goal is to represent that geographic diversity. We know that the lab developments are sort of spreading out throughout the region. And so we do want to capture those different points of view.
Great. Thank you.
Susan Barrett.
Hi there. Thank you so much. I also agree that this is so needed and great timing. So thank you very much. 2 questions. One thing we hear is that developers are told they can't get lenders to support developments that don't have ample parking. And I'm wondering if your study will cover that. And then my other question is, will this study also take into consideration what towns can do in regards to their TDM policies and processes? And I know the MPO had been working on a TDM study as well. Thank you.
Yeah, in response to the first question, I think that is intended to be part of the study. We have heard anecdotally as well that developers are getting that pressure from financing. So we would like to dig a little bit deeper into that. In terms of the TDM aspect, I think that's going to be outside of the scope of this study. But I think we're hoping to continue to build on this work in coming years. And I think that's a good avenue to pursue.
Thanks, Ruth. Allie Kleiman.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Yes, I agree with what everyone has said so far. I think this maybe relates to the last comment, but just in terms of the interviews and sort of figuring out what other municipalities are doing, I'm wondering if a good question would be around how other lab buildings are operating their parking. What the pricing structure is, or if it's, if certain spaces are reserved or can be used as accessory, because I know there's a lot of different policies around that, and that could impact the use of garages.
Yes, that's definitely part of our approach, is understanding that price, and also, surrounding parking availability. Are people parking on site or nearby? Just trying to get at if there's price parking, but there's free on-street parking fairly close by, it might not make as much of a difference. So we're really trying to dig into those details.
Lynn Diggins.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Kind of extending on what Allie just asked. It seems like in the early part, the early stages of the work scope, you're going to look at other regions, other areas, and what's going on with them. Is that correct? I mean,
Yes, we're going to focus mostly on the Boston region, but I think we'll
Okay.
look at other regions to see what their policies are, if there's anything interesting going on in other areas of the US, and also just look at the guidance that's provided in terms of ITE, parking rates and that sort of thing, just to understand the full landscape.
now, and just a quick follow, because I was kind of curious as to what other regions might be comparable to us. You know, so you have a sense of maybe a region or two you might look at. I'm just curious.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's going to be part of the work, is to determine
Right.
what's there. I mean,
Okay.
the Bay Area is the first region that
Okay.
kind of comes to mind.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Yeah, thanks.
Melissa Tintakis.
And I just wanted to double check in terms of what's being looked at. Are you looking also at the split of the buildings? So we have, the office portion and the lab office portion, or the lab office portion. So, and that'll be analyzed as well, because I think that varies as much as there is a kind of a standard.
Yeah, that's the hope, is to, kind of look at those different uses when there are mixed uses within a building. And, that'll help give us some insight into commercial parking utilization as well, which, or like office parking utilization as well as lab. So we're hoping to maximize the results by looking at all the different uses. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. And then, just gonna put a plug out there for a community like Burlington, which is kind of very different than kind of most of the inner core. So
Yeah,
to
we'd love
put
to.
that into the mix.
Yes. We'd love to speak with whoever is
Okay,
interested.
thanks.
Yeah, great.
Any other questions? Seeing none, can I get a motion in a second to approve this work scope as presented today? Lynn Diggins.
I would like to make a motion to approve the work scope for the lab and municipal parking study.
I'll second that, Melissa.
Thank you. Motion having been made and seconded. Please call the roll.
David Moeller,
Yes.
John Bouchard,
John Bouchard, yes.
John Romano,
John Romano, yes.
Ally Clayman,
Ally Clayman, yes.
Sarah Lee,
Sarah Lee, yes.
Eric Barassa,
Eric Barassa, yes.
Brian Kane,
Brian Kane, yes.
Leonard Diggins,
Leonard Diggins, yes.
Bill Conroy,
Bill Conroy, yes.
Jim Fitzgerald,
Jim Fitzgerald, yes.
Jay Monty,
Jay Monty, yes.
David Kozis,
David Kozis, yes.
Marissa Lau,
Marisa Lau, yes.
Rob King,
Rob King, yes.
Tom Bent,
Tom Bent, yes.
Dennis Giambetti,
Dennis Giambetti, yes.
Darlene Nguyen,
Darlene Nguyen, yes.
Melissa Tintakis,
Melissa Tintakis, yes.
Jennifer Constable,
Jennifer Constable, yes.
and Tom O'Rourke.
Tom O'Rourke, yes.
Motion carries unanimous, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Jonathan. Next item is bridge and pavement condition targets. Jack Moran and Annabelle Shine.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for the opportunity to present before the board today. Am I sharing or will my presentation be? There we go. Next slide, please. So thanks again for the opportunity. I'm assuming my audio is coming through just fine. We'll first give a background on the first full performance period, the measures that were put in place, a little bit about that performance. Take a look at how the Boston region itself, the inventories of the NHS bridge and pavements are, and then go on to the targets themselves that we're proposing for the next full performance period. So next slide, please. As has been presented and is probably within the knowledge base of this group, the measures themselves are entirely focused on the national highway system. So national highway system pavement, national highway system bridge. On the pavement side,
we break it up by interstate and non-interstate. That's consistent with the way MassDOT has measured condition for those two separate systems in the past. Major change here is that for us, the department has utilized an internal measure for some time known as pavement serviceability index. The federal measures have adopted a national standard for that condition measurement, and both the MassDOT measure and the federal measure are what are known as a full distress measure system. So they're taking both ride quality and then other indicators of distresses such as cracking, rutting, raveling, and combining them all together into a composite index. There are some differences between the MassDOT measure and the federal measure, and we are working towards getting, a good alignment in terms of knowing how a investment or a condition on the PSI scale relates to the federal scale. On the bridge side, again, national highway system only, and I think the differentiator here from past practice is that the measure itself is incorporating the size of the structure. So I think most notably in past years and certainly with the accelerated bridge program of a decade ago, we were focused on the number of bridges as a benchmark. So reducing the number of structurally deficient or poor bridges. The federal measure takes that one step forward and considers the size of the bridge in that measurement system. So we feel that's a very valuable addition to our performance management system because the size of the structures within the inventory varies widely, and the liability that those structures represent to condition, into budgeting, into investment is fairly consistent with the size of that structure. So if we can go on to the next slide. We did just complete the first full performance period. What we've tried to produce here is just a kind of a easy to read view of how those measures and targets actually manifested through those first 2 years, first two periods. You'll see that there's a NA there in some cases because there was a phased implementation. I'll try to be as high level on this as possible, but with the pavement measures themselves in recognition of other states adopting this more in-depth look at pavements, they kind of did a phased implementation where it was IRI only, then full distress, and that has been a little bit of an adjustment for us because we have been a full distress state for a long time, so it was a little bit of a step backward to just focus on IRI. All that being said, I think we feel fairly confident in our ability to forecast within these federal measures. In very real terms, this 2 and 4 year target setting, although there is a degree of modeling involved in it, of course, in a large part, the exercise here for us is to know what we're proposing within our existing capital plan and understanding when these investments are going to translate to conditions. And that, of course, puts an emphasis on project delivery and getting projects out when we think they are so that they can complete. And then that data is provided to Federal Highway for the performance management overall system through HPMS and the National Bridge Inventory. Next slide, please. A little bit on the interstate system in terms of pavement. This is the regional distribution across the state. The interstates are wholly owned by the DOT, and we program investments to that system through the STIP in the Interstate Maintenance Program, Interstate Pavement Program, and then for the MHS and WT through the Capital Investment Plan using state funds. Next slide, please. The non-interstate system within Massachusetts is not wholly owned by the DOT. Here we're providing the regional distribution along with the split of ownership between the state and the municipalities. Next slide, please. Within the Boston region, approximately a third of the interstate and round numbers, a third of the non-interstate system exists. Of the non-interstate roadways within the Boston region, a little more than a half are owned by municipalities. In terms of condition, what we're providing here is the roadways for the non-interstate system in terms of PSI. So as I previously mentioned, we don't use, the PSI is not a national condition measure. However, at this point, federal highway, the HPMS system, we're still working through how to use that more effectively. So we're unable to display that data by region. I just wanted to make that note. I think that we feel pretty confident that there's a good translation and they are proportional to each other. Main point I think here is that the municipally owned portions of the non-interstate NHS are in comparatively worse shape than the statewide average. So I think the underlying force there is that the DOT owned roads, the state owned roads are slightly better in terms of on the high level and slightly better on the lower end. So you want to have your percent excellent and good higher and your percent poor lower. Next slide, please. Moving on to targets. So for interstate, we saw a slight drop in condition for the higher end measure. So the percent good over 2019 and 21. So it's about 0.5%. We are currently at, so the baseline condition at 72% good within the federal measure. We are proposing targets of 70 and 70 for 23 and 25. The philosophy behind that is that, number one, we're still refining our knowledge of this new measure, and we want to try to keep this as conservative as possible. The other factor in that decision is that in recent years, we've had really good success putting a lot of true preservation projects out for the interstate system. So we would define that to be a limited scope, cost-effective treatment at a lower comparative lane mile cost to something a little more aggressive in terms of scope that would be a rehabilitation. In the next few years, there'll be a few more rehabilitation projects out. Most notably, we have a couple within the Boston region on 93 in Medford, Somerville, and then on the southern end, south of the city. These projects are fairly more expensive. They do involve some bridge work, some safety upgrades. That translates to a higher lane mile cost, which equates to less lane miles paid per year effectively. So basically, we are shooting for more or less a status quo within the margin of error. And specific to this measure, but for all of our measures, we will be taking that opportunity mid-performance period to look at where we're at and adjust the second term should we see fit to do so. On the lower end, the poor side, we'll get into this a little bit on the bridge measures in a bit, but Federal Highway has set a minimum condition threshold. So that's almost a overarching target for state DOTs and regions to observe. In this case, it is that no state should have over 5% poor on their interstate network. Formerly, we had established a target of 4%, and that was with the foreknowledge of that target and a desire not to come anywhere near it. We have seen that, in fact, our roadways, interstates themselves on that lower end are nowhere near that number, and we've actually gotten a little bit more aggressive and set a 2% target for the interstate system for this full performance period. Next slide, please. Non-interstate is a similar story with respect to percent good. We have a current baseline percentage of 33.9, about 34% good. That means there's a good bulk of roadways in fair condition. We are essentially flatlining our high end of this target. Couple just narrative points to be made there. Non-interstate roadways are kind of a mixed bag. Within the non-interstate system, you have limited access roads such as Route 3, or you could have an urban arterial that is a much different cross-section of road. And that's all within the same program for us through the STIP and the non-interstate program. And the character of the project can vary widely. We could be doing curb to curb pavement preservation on a limited access road, or we could be adding sidewalks and changing that cross section, modernizing it in a way. And there's a very there's quite a cost spectrum associated with those two types of actions. So effectively what we're saying here is we're really kind of monitoring the performance of the system within this measure. We don't foresee a dramatic improvement, but at the same token, we don't see us declining in any real way either. So again, kind of flatlining 23 and 25 with leaving the option for an adjustment mid-performance period. On the poor side, I think again here we were happy to see that we don't have a lot of what would be determined to be poor roadways within the federal measure, and we hope to keep it that way and have set targets that constrain us to about 5% of that network being poor. Next slide, please. On the bridge side, again, here's your regional distribution along with ownership. Overall, across the state, the DOT does own the majority of NHS bridges. Next slide, please. Within the Boston region, there's 844 NHS bridges with about 34 owned by municipalities. The remainder are owned by the department. This is about 50% of the state inventory by area. And area is the critical point here because the size of the bridge is certainly a big factor, particularly in the Boston region, where some of our biggest bridges reside. As mentioned before, the critical thing that we are focused on in the case of NHS bridges is attaining or getting below the minimum condition threshold for poor percentage. We are currently at 11.25 as shown here. This is down from a height of about 16-17% about 5 years ago. Just a little bit of editorial on this measure that I'll probably add a little bit once we start talking about targets. Essentially, we consider poor bridges to be essentially a backlog. And in most cases, that is a structure that really is at its end of life. Advanced deterioration in major components of that structure. In some cases, we can perform a rehabilitation. In many cases, we are doing a full replacement. There's a considerable burden in terms of design effort and investment to rehabilitate and replace bridges, but really long-term, this is probably a story we have told for some time, that it really is a preservation strategy that's going to keep us essentially with that backlog at a manageable level and allow us to reduce it at the same time. And that's certainly a big part of what we see the future coming to be within the investment plan in the CIP this year and in the STIP as well. Boston bridges are slightly worse in terms of that backlog compared to statewide, and slightly less on the percent good as well. Next slide, please. And continuing that conversation, I'll just give you a little bit of the thinking that goes behind our target setting here. As I had mentioned, really that percent poor category is our backlog. And to remediate that backlog, it's typically a rehab or replacement. And on the good side, it's kind of a similar story. It's difficult for us to increase the percent good bridges without a major capital action. Preservation typically will not make a fair bridge good, but it will certainly help to keep a good bridge good. In the near term, we have already started advancing projects with the BIL and NGB GANs for preservation. Those projects are in fact out on the street in across the state now, and they are preservation projects. In starting with 24 and into 25 and 26, we will be advancing the rehabs and replacements that have been funded through these funds within the Bridge Formula Program of BIL and the Next Gen Bridge GANs. These projects will likely take 3 to 4 years to complete, and those projects will have an effect on the percent good by flipping either backlog bridges to good condition or in some cases changing fair to good. In the near term, we don't see that percent good changing, but come 26 and 27, we would see those conditions start to manifest themselves from the program. On the poor side, it's a similar story. It's really, we want to keep that number where it's at, though. We don't want that number to grow. And that's where we see the near-term gains from the preservation program. And you see us flatlining that target at 12%. The big in both measures, we see condition improvements beyond this full performance period, but likely within the first period of the next performance period. Believe that those are all my slides here, but I'm happy to discuss any other questions or comments you have.
Questions? Eric Barassa.
Thanks, Jack. This is really a good presentation. Just going back to poor, a poor bridge is a bridge. Can you describe that again? You said it's sort of it's at the end of its life. We can rehab it, and it's it's still working, it's still functioning, but it's going to take a real or we can preserve it, I guess, but it's going to take a real rehab to get it into the fair or good category. And it's the later part. It's the fiscal years that are out further, where we have the bigger influx of the bill bridge funds that are gonna do that. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct. In fact, I think with this STIP, you'll see more rehabs and replacements being obligated through the STIP, but just recognizing the fact that those projects need to get to construction after advertisement 3 to 4 years down the road. We need to inspect that new bridge or remove it from the inventory once it's complete. Then we submit our data to Federal Highway. So it's just the mechanics of all of those, and within the performance management schedule, realistically, we see those gains being, beyond condition year 25.
Okay, thank you.
Lynn Diggins.
Thank you. Well, from working with you all, I'm totally confident that you are going to prioritize the bridge repair and replacement in a prudent way. So my question now is more just kind of basic understanding. You mentioned something earlier about how now we have to factor in the size of the bridges. So I guess the question is, what's meant by size? Is it just like, like you do the physical area of it, or is it capacity, or what? And then how does that factor in or correlate with the capacity and the economic impact of the bridge?
Great couple questions there. So I think the first one, you had it right the first time. Effectively, kind of people refer to it as deck area. I try not to call it that because people then think it becomes confusing, and the thought then is, okay, well, this has to do with the concrete deck itself. In kind of general terms, there's three major components of a bridge. There's the riding surface itself, which is either asphalt or sometimes exposed concrete. That's your deck. Your superstructure, which is your carrying members, and then your substructure, which translates the load to the ground. Effectively, if any one of those three is considered to be in poor condition, then the overall bridge is considered to be poor. So you could have deteriorated concrete on your bridge deck. You could have advanced corrosion on your structural steel members of your superstructure, or you could have concrete deterioration of your substructure or steel piers that are within your substructure that are poor. Any one of those is poor, your bridge is poor. And the way the mechanics work on this is the size is what you said. It's basically if you were in plan view looking down on a bridge, that area that's represented by the deck, that's a square footage. You sum up your entire inventory, square footage, that's your denominator. And then the area on bridges that are poor is your numerator. And that's basically your fractional amount of your network that's either in poor condition in the example I just gave, or similarly on the good side. So it doesn't relate to capacity of the bridge in terms of throughput of vehicles or anything like that. It's strictly the size of the bridge. And why that's meaningful is because, we do effectively, it's like a house, a square foot it's an indicator of the need of the bridge. And we have the average national highway system bridge in Massachusetts is about 14,000 square feet. We have many bridges in excess of 100,000 square feet. So by factoring in this size, you really are able to better articulate needs, because bridge X, if it's twice the size of bridge Y, is going to cost twice as much, most likely, with some variation. And then if that same large bridge goes to a poor condition, then it's going to have a proportional effect on the network condition. So there's a lot of ways that we use this measure in our forecasting. And as I mentioned earlier, the project delivery aspect is key here, because one singular bridge can have a big effect on condition. And knowing when that project completes or when that bridge becomes deficient is a key part of what we do for bridge management.
Thank you. That was very insightful. Appreciate it.
Brian King. Can unmute yourself, Brian? Somebody unmute Brian, please. There you go, Brian.
Thank you very much. So I'm going to support this. We're adopting the Commonwealth's metrics. We did this the last time on stuff, and probably not. We didn't want to go outside the norm. I get it, no problem. I guess my question and maybe more of a comment, and David, I guess I'm going to ask this of you. Once we have these measures and we know what we have to do to bring our bridges into a state of good repair, for the love of God, can we not fund it with GANs? Please.
You're asking, so I appreciate your faith in me, Brian, but I certainly can't answer a question about whether the legislature and the governor should support GANs. But thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, well, I'll bring it to a higher power. You're the highest power here, David. So we cannot rob our children and grandchildren to pay for the construction of our infrastructure today that we've neglected for 30 years. And I think everyone here understands that. And I think everyone here also should understand from an MPO perspective, when that happens, it just takes money away from us to allocate to cities and towns and other things and safety projects in years to come. And we're seeing this now on the tip. So it's just something that we all need to be aware of and ensure that we can try to prevent and pay for our infrastructure in his current dollars as we can. So let's all support this, and then let's go do the legwork to make sure it's actually paid for properly. Thank you.
Thank you, Brian. Other comments or questions at this time? Seeing none, can I get a motion and a second to endorse the statewide targets on behalf of the Boston MPO? Brian King.
Move to endorse.
Eric Barassa.
I'll second that motion.
Motion has been made and seconded. Please call the roll.
David Moeller,
Yes.
John Bouchard,
John Bouchard, yes.
John Romano,
John Romano, yes.
Ally Clayman,
Ally Clayman, yes.
Sarah Lee,
Sarah Lee, yes.
Eric Barassa,
Eric Barassa, yes.
Brian Kane,
Brian Kane, yes.
Leonard Diggins,
Leonard Diggins, yes.
Bill Conroy,
Bill Conroy, yes.
Jim Fitzgerald,
Jim Fitzgerald, yes.
Jay Monty,
Jay Monty, yes.
David Kozis,
David Kozis, yes.
Marisa Lau,
Marisa Lau, yes.
Rob King,
Rob King, yes.
Tom Bent,
Tom Bent, yes.
Dennis Giambetti,
Dennis Giambetti, yes.
Darlene Nguyen,
Darlene Nguyen, yes.
Melissa Tintaklis,
Melissa Tintaklis, yes.
Jennifer Constable,
Jennifer Constable, yes.
and Tom O'Rourke.
Tom O'Rourke, yes.
Motion carries unanimous, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Thank you, Jack.
Thank you for the time.
Next item on the agenda is TIP project readiness updates. Ethan LaPointe.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Hello, everybody. Again, for those who were not here earlier, my name is Ethan LaPointe. My second presentation today will be covering the TIP project readiness updates for federal fiscal years 24 to 28 for the development TIP, but also to provide some updates on projects currently programmed in 2023 through 7, the current TIP. If we go on to the next slide, please, just so I can provide a brief overview of today's presentation. Today's presentation will commence with a review of the TIP development timeline before we move into the project readiness scenario. This readiness scenario will really represent the baseline funding and programming scenario that combines the updated financial information that last month's MARPA meeting presented and was already presented to the board with the project readiness updates provided by MassDOT at last week's TIP readiness days on February 8th. So that going forward, as projects are selected for programming in the upcoming 24 to 28 TIP, we have an understanding on where currently programmed projects are at as far as where they will lie. We will then wrap up the presentation today with some next steps in discussion regarding the nature of some of these shifts. There's a lot here, so if we go on to the next slide, I would like to draw your attention to the fiscal years 24 to 28 TIP project readiness scenario table, which Logan just posted in the chat. This table was posted in advance of this meeting a few days back, and I will go into shortly the nature of the color coding and breakouts and some of the line items shown in here. But for now, I'm going to preface that with just a quick look back on where we are at in the development cycle and effectively where we're at with regard to how rubber hits the road here. If we go to the next slide and then the slide after that, please, that will take us to the development timeline. This timeline depicts the schedule for developing the 24 to 28 TIP. If this were a map, that red box on screen would basically say you are here, where we're presenting readiness updates to the MPO regarding the projects already programmed in the TIP. In previous MPO meetings, staff have discussed various topics, including how projects may be initiated for review, the draft universe of projects representing all potential projects that may be programmed, the project scoring process and financial information. And now, as mentioned, we are really in where the rubber hits the road, discussing how the projects that have already received funding may be changing or shifting and have done so over the course of this past year. At the end of this presentation, when we discuss the next steps and have our conclusion, there's also going to be a draft presentation of project scenarios next March. So over this next month, in light of some of the developments presented here today, we'll be using these kinds of developments to really frame that discussion. We're still on track for an endorsement of the final TIP, which we're targeting a June 1st date on, with a public comment launch with a draft TIP at the April 20th meeting. But between now and then, the focus is really going to be on developing a series of draft programming scenarios to the MPO, not only addressing some of the changes caused by these readiness updates, but also, of course, programming the projects that were applied for to the MPO this past December. So if we move on, we can start getting into the weeds on some of the project readiness updates. So next slide, please. So as far as what the TIP readiness days are an annual meeting between MassDOT and MPO staff that discusses the status of projects currently funded in the TIP. MassDOT holds this meeting for all of the MPOs across the state of Massachusetts and brings together really what's an agency-wide effort with specialists in areas like environmental planning and permitting, right-of-way, and of course, the Office of Transportation Planning to identify potential risks, changes, and really make recommendations as necessary for all projects in the statewide transportation improvement program. This not only means the regional target projects, which are going to be the focus of today's presentation, but also any statewide highway projects that fall within the region. The information presented during the tip readiness days directly informs how the next tip is developed, effectively functioning as the baseline scenario. But as a starting point, because of the nature of this information, it can and will evolve in the coming weeks as we receive feedback from proponents like some of the municipalities that propose the projects that are being discussed here today, and also any additional developments that a project may see as it approaches things like its advertising date or milestones in its project design cycle. If we go on to the next slide, I can get into really the key and legend here as far as interpreting that tip readiness table. So first off, there are some adjustments to the text of what falls within the slides. These represent really at-risk projects on both a high and moderate degree of risk. Projects that are shown in red text are identified as such as they may not meet their scheduled date for advertising. The date that a project is programmed in the tip for reflects the date that it may advertise for construction. If an advertising date shifts out of a given fiscal year, therefore the funding that it has programmed for it may also shift as well. Projects that have an asterisk in front of it are of more moderate risk and may remain in their currently programmed year if a potential issue is avoided or adjusted. Again, these are more projects that perhaps there is a permitting risk that may be identified or may come into effect, but there's some uncertainty as to whether or not it may apply, or it's more of a coordination issue. If we go on to the next slide, we can see really what the cell shading color key is, which I think is the primary consideration here. There are 5 categories that this shading represents. First, the pale yellow color shows projects with increases in costs that are beyond $500,000 or a 20% increase. In this case, and we will go into an itemized list of each of these projects shortly, but in these cases, this really reflects some of the MPO's cost change thresholds that I would usually want to look at. Purple projects are ones with recommended delays due to project readiness concerns. These recommendations come from MassDOT and result from discussions also with MPO staff and are presented at the readiness days. Inversely, a solid readiness status for a project may result in a green highlight, which means it may have an opportunity for earlier programming in the current tip. Lastly, at the very bottom of the readiness days table, you will see 2 different shades of blue. The first lighter shade of blue shows a potential new project. Many of these are proposed by the Massachusetts Department of Transportation for inclusion in the tip, perhaps as a statewide highway project. The ones that are dark blue are similar. However, those dark blue projects are also ones where MPO staff received an application for regional target funding for that project. And now if we go on to the next slide, lastly, we can do some housekeeping and get some baseline assumptions out of the way before we start talking about specific projects and funding considerations. First off, the table includes all project cost changes that MassDOT proposed. It also includes the retention of all current funding commitments that are currently in the 23 to 27 tip. Third, it includes funding holds for any future investments already projected in 2028 that may carry forward. If we could go on to the next slide, please. I may have just missed that. Thank you. Sorry about that. So first off, the Community Connections Program is based on MPO approved funding levels, has an amount of $2.5 million a year that will continue into 2028. And also similarly, the Transit Modernization Program, which is an upcoming investment program, will be programmed for $6.5 million again in 2028. These are baseline figures for this baseline scenarios and based on decisions made as part of the draft scenario creation process and discussions with the board. These things are subject to change, just a placeholder for now. We also include MassDOT's recommendations for project schedule changes and make the assumptions that any of the project schedule changes MassDOT proposes will be executed as part of this draft scenario. And then there is a 4% annual inflation added starting in 2024 to reflect any cost changes for projects that may be shifted out, if applicable. If we go on to the next slide, we can talk about a familiar slide here. This slide shows the amount of regional target funding allocated to the MPO for this coming tip cycle, including this year, fiscal year 2023's, and overall funding amount for target. This information was presented to the board at a previous meeting, but it's relevant here again, as it's the bedrock of really what the scenario is built on. You can see that the funding outlook for fiscal years 2023 through 2026 remains unchanged from last year's scenario, but with the conclusion of grant anticipation notes debt service, which is what GANS refers to, in 2026, you can see that there is now more funding available for programming in 2027 and 2028 versus previous years. specifically baseline funding allocations for 23 through 27. The current tip range from $130 to $125 million each year. Right now, we are projecting an increase in 27 and 28, approaching $160 million for each of those years. Now, without further ado, if we go on to the next slide, we can start to talk about some of the specific projects where MassDOT made adjustment recommendations regarding different readiness updates. For a refresher, these first few slides will cover the cost increases. These cost increase thresholds are triggered either when a project witnesses a budget increase that is 20% or greater in its programmed cost, or if that increase is greater than $500,000. The first project we are discussing is one that is in federal fiscal years 2023. This is the budget estimate for the Lowell and Woburn Street project in Wilmington, which is increasing by $694,000, or approximately 11% in that category. I believe we actually have it as a 9 on there, but the revised estimate really here is the result of the completed 100% design, and this increase comes on the tail of a prior 42% increase in the project's budget during the last tip cycle. As a fiscal year 2023 project, this change will likely not carry over into the development tip, but it will be reflected in a future amendment for the current 23 to 27 tip once everything is in order as far as final design and PS&E. The next few projects are in the federal fiscal year's 2024 program. This starts with Cohasset's Justice Cushing Highway. This project has recently received a 100% design submission, and as a result, its new budget estimate is $17.6 million, up from its current program allocation of $12.5 million, an increase of approximately 41% here. Similarly, the next two projects in Littleton and Peabody, both fiscal year 2024 projects, have current budget estimates at $3.9 million each. The Littleton project is the reconstruction of Foster Street, and the Peabody project is the Independence Greenway extension. The Foster Street project has increased from $3.99 million to $5.37 million, approximately 34.5%, and the Independence Greenway extension has increased in budget from $3.9 million to $5.2 million, a 33% increase. The last project dedicated, I should say, project increase is another one in fiscal 24, this time in Rentham. This is the Route 1A at Interstate 495 off-ramps reconfiguration project. The current budget program for the tip is a $15.58 million project, which is now increased by 34.22% to $20.9 million as a result of some of the recommendations made at tip readiness days. If we go on to the next slide, we really have our inverse cases. This incidentally applies to projects that fall between 2025 and 2027. Here we have projects where revised budget estimates warranted decreases in the program budget that also reflect the change thresholds in the opposite direction. Starting in 2025, there is the Route 3A improvement in Hingham, which is a 3.7 decrease in cost from $15.59 million to $15 million. Belmont's component of the Mass Central Rail Trail has decreased in budget by 3.57% down to $20.2 million from approximately $21 million. Weston has two cost decreases in the 2026 program, starting with the intersection improvement and traffic safety project at the intersection of Boston Post Road and Wellesley Street. This first project has decreased in budget from $2.68 million to $2.18 million, a 18.5% decrease. The Route 30 reconstruction project, which is a complete streets and safety improvement effort, has decreased in budget from $17 million to $16.4 million. And last but not least, we have Brookline's Washington Street rehabilitation, programmed for $30 million right now in the current tip with regional target funding, and has decreased in budget from $30 million to nearly $29 million, another 3.45% decrease. So if we move on to the next slides, we can start talking about some of the high-risk projects. These are projects that may not necessarily have date changes as far as their recommendations for their programming year, but may have factors that could cause changes in the near future if they are not avoided. There are 3 projects classified here, each of which also have their own budget changes associated with. The first is the Bridge Street reconstruction project in Beverly, which has witnessed a cost increase of 8.4% to $9.59 million. The major driver of this is continuation of the design process and the identification of additional utility concerns along the corridor. Similarly, the Mount Auburn Street rehabilitation project in Watertown is a major consideration for the MPO. This is another federal fiscal year's 2023 project, but it also has a small amount of funding in 2024. The vast majority of its now $27.9 million budget, however, is currently programmed in 2023, and its scheduled advertising date is near the end of the fiscal year. MassDOT staff is currently aggressively working with stakeholders to achieve its targeted advertising date in 2023, and also MassDOT and MPO staff are monitoring this project closely to ensure that it stays on track for advertisement and does not slide into fiscal year 2024. Lastly, there is a project that was commented on earlier in this meeting, which is the Park and Pearl Street reconstruction in Chelsea. This project has had a 3.4% decrease in its estimated budget to $11.7 million. This is a decrease from $12.1 million. The major consideration for this project does not necessarily have to do with the scope of work proposed for this line item specifically, but rather coordination with a project in a separate municipality, this case being Boston, which is the McCardle Street Bridge rehab. The McCardle Street Bridge is a nearby asset to this project, currently funded for design, but whose construction funding has not yet been programmed and therefore identified. Depending on the year that bridge may be programmed, if at all, it may have implications and coordination issues for this project. Staff are currently monitoring any developments there and are happy to work with any municipality to iron that out. And now moving on to the next slide, we can start talking about some of the schedule and really delay recommendations here. There are a total of 8 projects recommended for delay this year, 4 of which are currently in the 2024 program and are shown on this slide. The first project is in Ashland. This is the Cherry Street and Rail Crossing Rehabilitation Project. The recommendation is to move it from federal fiscal years 2024 to 2025. Its current revised budget is $1.2 million, and the major factor driving this recommendation is coordination with the MBTA, which operates rail service through that specific rail crossing, and just coordination with local stakeholders. In similar fashion as a project returning from the delay list from last year, which is the Boylston Street reconstruction in Boston. Last year, the project was delayed from federal fiscal year 2023 to 2024. And again, this year, the recommendation is a delay from 24 to 25. The budget estimate for this project is $8.6 million. The delay recommendation here is really being driven by a recent subsurface utility assessment and also the need for additional public design hearings and meetings for stakeholder engagement. The results of that subsurface utility assessment effectively identified additional permitting requirements that must be fulfilled before the project can execute. Third, we have the Lynn Essex Street reconstruction project. The budget for this project increased by 11.91%, up to $19.7 million. The reason for the delay of this project from fiscal 24 to 25 are considerations that have emerged as part of the timeline for design development. Fourth, in Ipswich, there is a delay of the Central and South Main Streets projects from fiscal year 24 to 26. This project is budgeted for $5.5 million and is being delayed due to utility and right-of-way concerns. If we go on to the next slide, we can move on to discuss some of the projects that are currently outside of fiscal years 24 from 25 to 27. First off, in Woburn is a project moving from fiscal year 25 to 6. This is the Woburn Common Project, a complete streets project within Woburn. The revised budget for this project has decreased by 3.7% to about $14.95 million. Again, this is a consideration for additional design coordination and process made on the design. The next project is really a major consideration for the MPO and the region. This is the Rutherford Avenue reconstruction project in Boston. The currently programmed year for this project in the 23 to 27 tip is an advanced construction schedule across 2025 to 2028. This was delayed in the last tip as well, I believe from 23 to 25 for its start date. And a further delay is being recommended here for the first year of funding programming to 2028. The total estimated budget for this project is $176.5 million. Because this project is being funded for advanced construction across multiple years, the new programming recommendation, because it will only appear for programming in 2028, is for $33.5 million, its first funding year in 28. Currently, it has funding programmed in approximately 30 million plus between 25 and 7 in the current tip. The main driver for this delay is design coordination and is progress made regarding project readiness, permitting, right away, etc. The third project here is in Norwood. This is the intersection improvements at Route 1 and University Avenue. Similar to Rutherford Avenue, its funding is being programmed across multiple years, 25 and 6 in this case, and will be shifted out 1 year, so it has a 26 to 7 spread. The budget for this project is $24.8 million and is being shifted due to utility concerns, but primarily stormwater concerns in wetlands, culvert installation, etc. Lastly, in Swampscott, there's the rail trail construction project being shifted from fiscal year 2027 to 2028 with a budget decrease of 3.45% down to $8.6 million. This is another consideration for right-of-way and also the progress being made on design for that project. Now, finally, if we move on to the next slide, we can talk about we can discuss some of really what the bottom line is. So at the very top cell here, you can see the total available regional highway target funds for the 2024 to 28 tip, with 2023 put in as a reference. As discussed earlier in this presentation, between 23 and 26, you can see approaching $130 million of available regional target funds. It's difficult to see on the screen, perhaps in the size of the text, but the second column on the lower part of the screen shows the proposed programming amounts for each of the years. The first column for each of those year funding rows shows the current amounts and therefore the deltas there. You can see that because of the delays of several projects, there's now a significant amount of funding availability across each of the proposed fiscal years in the 2024 to 28 tip, being $32.8 million of funding availability in 24, approximately 25% of total funding, 33.7 million available in 25, 26.2% of available funding, $24 million in 26, 19.2%. In 27, there's $54.59 million, 35.2%. This also incorporates, as you can see from last year's tip, approximately $26.5 million, which was already set aside during that development cycle. And then lastly, we have the new year for this tip, 2028, of which $106.928 million remains for programming, 67.7% of overall funding. This reflects the amount of funding that is left, not only after the set-asides for transit modernization and community connections, but also any ongoing funding obligations to major regional projects, such as McGrath Highway or Rutherford Avenue. This means that there is a total available regional target balance left for the region of $252 million, or 36.1% of all regional target funding. With that, I would like to move on to the next steps of this discussion to really put where this information falls in context of developing the tip. At the next MPO meeting on March 2nd, there will be a discussion on tip project scores. These scores will be for the projects that were applied for funding for the fiscal 24 to 28 tip. We will also be inviting some proponents to that who during the public comment period may speak to the nature of their projects and why those projects should be funded. By the end of March, we're hoping that starting with the March 16th meeting into the end of the month, there will be discussions around a series of draft tip funding scenarios, which will build upon the foundation set by this readiness scenario to address different regional priorities, needs, funding issues, or long-term strategies that the board thinks the tip should pursue so that it is consistent with the board's vision, goals, and objectives. In late April, specifically for the April 20th meeting, we are hoping to have a draft tip document, projects and all, ready for public review and comment for final endorsement at the June 1st MPO board meeting. If we go on to the next slide, we can really talk about the three core things that I think will frame today's discussion. I'm happy to clarify any information on what was presented today, review it, answer any questions on project readiness and cost, and discuss the programming implications that these changes are going to have for the 24 to 28 tip.
Questions for Ethan or others or comments? Dennis G. and Betty.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a couple if I could. Great presentation, by the way, very, very clear. and precise. The question I have is regarding the Ashland project for is being moved out from 24 to 25. I know you mentioned coordination and between the MBTA and local stakeholders. Can you maybe say a little bit more about what that actually means? What is the coordination issues? Because I spoke to the local folks, town manager in particular, and he wasn't unaware of any issues from a local perspective. So I just wonder what may be driving that.
My understanding, and I'm happy to follow up on this after if I get additional clarification, is that one of the major coordination drivers is regarding the availability of inspection and engineers for the work site, which is mostly an MBTA consideration. Also considerations for potential closures, service through the area, et cetera. It's primarily an MBTA coordination consideration, I believe.
Okay, but that would delay it for a whole year because of those considerations, because they have other things they're doing, or is, what would be is it a resource issue?
I would be happy to put you in touch with the MassDOT Highway District and also the project manager for this project, because they're a little bit more familiar than I am as far as specific permitting needs for the work, which would in turn reflect what might push it out. A 3-month permit could move it from one fiscal year to another.
Gotcha. Okay, I can follow up with that. I can do that. As long as I know where to hunt, that'd be great. Thank you. I appreciate that.
Yeah, thank
you.
The
other questions I have are there were 3 projects in Metro West area that with colored blue, and they are one in Framingham, one in Natick, and one in Wellesley, that are determined as being state highway projects. Do we have an idea of what year they may be being considered to be placed in?
We will have further discussions on what potential years those projects could be placed in on March 2nd. I believe the Natick one you were referring to is one of the ones that the MPO received an application for, being the Cochituate Rail Trail project. That is one that staff are currently scoring for potential consideration in the TIP. This is also a project I will note here that my understanding is that it's part of additional coordination with the Natick Center train station project as well.
Absolutely correct. Yes. Okay, good. Yeah. I was just more concerned about the culvert one in Framingham. What may be thinking about that. That's something that is of high priority for the community because of its location to a Lake Washaycom, a waterway. Okay. Thanks.
Thanks, Mr. Chair, and thanks, Ethan, for a great presentation. It does seem we're headed back to this familiar place again where we are pushing projects out, in this case, some pretty significant projects, and we're got a big hole to fill these next couple of years. And I want to echo Brad Rossman's comments from earlier. We have not heard from the MBTA yet regarding projects that we may be able to assist with. And that's an important piece and one that I expect we ought to hear back from the MBTA, and maybe they can provide an update next meeting about that. But I think, we've been through this before where we have this hole and we sort of have projects not forced on us, but brought to us to fill that hole that are not projects that have been through our own evaluation. And I don't think that looks particularly well on this body when that happens. So I do hope that it may happen this year because we're too close to the date, but where it's obvious now that we are going to have big holes to fill in 25 and probably 26, maybe even 27. I really would like to hear from MassDOT and the T in terms of what projects can be accelerated that maybe a little further out the tip, but with a little extra help can be brought forward. But I want to make sure we use this opportunity, if not for this year, certainly for next year, to make sure that any holes we fill are not sort of these last minute projects that come to us just to fill the gap. Thank you.
Thank you, Jay. Brian King.
Thanks, David. I just want to echo what Dennis said about the Ashland commuter rail Cherry Street Station project. There was a death or a vehicle strike out there at this location on February 7th. It's a really important project for the town. I've spoken with some select board folks out there. And I guess I would ask, I don't know, Ali, if you can do this. I mean, I've reached out to some folks at the T as well. if it's possible by next week when we sort of come back, if there's anything that can be done to keep Cherry Street on target and on its current trajectory, its current location, its current place in the tip, I really think that's something that from a safety perspective should happen. It's just Ashland has had several person strikes by commuter rail recently, and it's a very sensitive subject, I guess I'd go so far as to say. So I guess that's a request to the T in addition to bring in some good projects. If there's anything we can do to keep Cherry Street on track, no pun intended, let's do it, please. Thank you.
Leonard Diggins.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So a couple of questions. So regarding the Watertown project on Mount Auburn Street, you say that you're working with them to get it advertised on time. What's the issue?
It's less of a, let me be careful with my choice of words here. As far as the issue, it's more concerned that the current advertising date for the project is near the end of the fiscal year. Should any issues emerge that may potentially slide that advertising date out of the fiscal year, regardless of what that specific issue may be, it may cause a funding ripple that would need to be adjusted quickly. Given the amount of funding that project has, approximately $25 million, we're being really conservative here in our estimates by identifying that and saying, should something move here, it may have significant funding implications, which is why MassDOT and MPO staff are being very aggressive. I think John Bouchard has his hand up, so I think he might be able to speak to that much better.
John?
Oh, thank you. This is almost one of my favorite days. Readiness Days is my favorite, and this is my next favorite, taking all the comments. In all seriousness, we're working very closely with our partners, in our district offices and with the T on all of our projects that are experiencing delay, or we're trying with coordination specifically for Ashland, Watertown, which is kind of on the current discussion. I think we're in good shape to deliver that in the latter part of this fiscal year. It's going to be an August or a September, mid-September advertising, probably near the very end of our ad cycle. And it is AC'd over those 2 years, and we're working very hard with the designer and the town to make this, or the city now, to make this go forward. We have worked, and the designer and the town especially have worked really hard on T coordination, catenary lines, and complete streets elements, and I'm confident we're going to deliver that. We just raise it as a project of concern that we're focusing on, and just so we can make sure if there was any, we don't want to cause any holes in the Boston region or any other region for that matter, but it's one that we've just raised as there's still a few challenges to deliver in the latter part of this fiscal year.
I got you. Well, it just seems like, if this is the advertising date, having it so late, in the fiscal year, it just seems like as a policy, we probably wouldn't want to have, projects having their advertising dates so late in the cycle, in an annual cycle, because everything slips, and so if inherently.
And Len, that is one of our policies. We're not programming certain projects in the latter part of the fiscal year, but sometimes it's, can we still deliver this within the funding, the program cycle? And the only, we're going to push it to the very end to make sure that we can deliver this project. But as I said, we're confident with our district offices, with City of Watertown, and with our design, with the city's designer, that we're going to deliver this. It's just going to be, we kind of have an all hands on deck to make sure we deliver it for this August, September.
Gotcha. And with respect to me filling in the gaps, in fiscal year 25 and beyond, even if they're not MBTA projects, if there's state, other state projects, I think the issue with the MPO is more that we just don't get a sense as to whether or not these projects fit into our long range transportation goals, and so to the extent that we can work with our state colleagues here, MassDOT colleagues, to help with that would be great, because one of the good things I think about having so much state representation on the board is that we work with each other a lot and we get to understand each other's goals. And so I think I think we can go a long way towards making everyone more comfortable when we have to make those decisions in April. Thank you.
Thank you, Lynn. Bill Conroy.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you. I just wanted to confirm with Ethan that I saw 2028 for Rutherford Ave. Is that correct?
My understanding, Bill, and thank you for
Okay.
bringing that up, is that right now the MPO is conservatively programming it in 2028. This is again a baseline scenario, and there may be developments over the next few years that change things, but I believe MassDOT's recommendation for the project is 28.
Okay, I was just being
there.
cynical on that. I just thought it was just my way of joking. But that being said, spending a lot of time on this project my prior predecessor, Jim Galuli, on this project and being on this project for many, many years. We've made some significant gains in this project, as the MPO knows, going back to a public hearing back in June of 21, and then progressing with our 25% design. And then, come January of 2022, we were throwing a little kink in our project that we were asked to include a BRT in our current design. That being said, there was a lot of factors going on, administration, change in the administrations, as well as other modes of transportation really started to come online there with significantly as it relates to BRT and others, other factors there. We did have a chance to meet with Secretary Kim at MEPR about where we stood with MEPR as far as the impact. And albeit she thought it was somewhat minimal, but we were under the impression we may or may not have to file and extend an EIR. So that being said, where we stand today with the city is we were making a commitment to roll up our sleeves to make sure that in working with our colleagues, our sister colleagues at the MBTA, to make sure we put out the best product for the residents of Charlestown, the city of Boston, as well as the region. That being said, there's a lot of pluses and minuses with the decision going forward. So we want to weigh those options carefully. And we've made a commitment in-house and a commitment to Mass DOT to make sure that we work with them over the next few months to come up with a conceptual design review that would be reviewed by all, as well as Federal Highway, as we go forward. And we would ask that, the fact that if we in fact do meet these goals that are going to be rigorous at best, and that we could probably be rescheduled maybe back into 2026. That being said, there was always a gentleman's agreement, my understanding, that Rutherford would be a project that would go before the McGrath. And I don't know. I mean, I see McGrath being slated right now for 2027. So this being said, I know there's a lot of factors out there. And even if we had our current design that was approved, I believe we still would have been delayed based upon the fact that we have significant major infrastructure projects in the region right now, with the North Washington Street being delayed, as well as the Marfa and Mystic bridges coming online, as well as the Cambridge Street Bridge, which we hope to get online as well. So there's a lot of moving parts here, but as I say to my colleagues within City Hall, we want to make sure we get this project right the first time. And I think we will do that with the help of not only MassDOT, not only the help of MBTA, but the help of Everett, Somerville, and other cities and communities within the region. Thank you.
Thank you, Bill. Other comments from MPO members? Seeing none. Oh, wait. Ally Clayman.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Just wanted to respond to some of the conversation around MBTA projects. So in terms of the process that we are going through now, we're actively working through our own CIP process right now in terms of prioritizing projects and figuring out what is going to fit in the MBTA CIP. And we would be happy to bring a list of projects to the MPO, once some more of those decisions are made.
Thanks, Ally. Other MPO members? Seeing none. Rich Benevento.
Thank you, and good morning. I thought I would just, a couple of projects that we're involved in had red lettering. So I figured I'd just kind of give you an update, and that was the Bridge Street project in Beverly, and of course, Mount Auburn Street that we just talked about in Watertown. Just as a quick update, Bridge Street, 100% plans are going in actually next week. So that project is moving forward. I know the city has been advancing the right-of-way acquisitions, so that seems to be moving quickly as well. There was a little bit of some coordination things with the closure of the Hall Whitaker Bridge in terms of where the project limits are going to stop and all those sorts of things, and we're working and discussing those with Mass DOT right now. But yeah, 100% plans going in actually next week. In terms of Mount Auburn Street, 100% plans for Mount Auburn Street are scheduled to go in March, later in March. So those are advancing. The city now, there used to be a city known as the town of Watertown. Now they guess there's just the city of Watertown. So in any case, they have an appraiser on board. They're advancing the right-of-way process with that. As you all may know, there was quite a bit of conversation. Deputy Chief Bashard also mentioned that with the MBTA relative to the catenary poles. They coming down? Are they staying up? What are we doing with them? So that kind of hung things up a little bit, but it's full steam ahead with that. And as I mentioned, 100% plans for that should be going in sometime later in March. So everything is advancing on both of those. And I know they were highlighted in red, so I figured I would just kind of give everyone an update.
Thank you, Rick. Any other comments or questions from MPO or members of the public at this time? Seeing none. Thank you, Ethan. Next item on the agenda is Community Connection Shuttles Performance Update. You again, Ethan.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. All right, so staying in the similar vein of the status on currently programmed projects in the TIP, this presentation is going to provide an update on really the Community Connections Shuttle Operations Funding Program, which is one of 6 investment categories within the Community Connections Funding Program. Specifically, we'll be taking a deeper look at the Canton's Royal Street Shuttle Project, which is administered by the Neponset Valley Transportation Management Association Authority. And also here's some words later in the presentation from some folks at Newton regarding their NUMO shuttle program. If we go on to the next slide, we can do a quick overview on some of the guts of this presentation. I'll provide an overview on what Community Connections funding is, how it's funded, how it's emerged, how much, the nature of a shuttle operations pilot project, an overview of what projects are currently programmed for the 23-27 TIP and may be carried forward for funding into fiscal years 24 and 5 by nature of its pilot status, the Neponset Valley TMA's performance report on the Royal Street Shuttle in Canton, and as mentioned, we'll hear some more verbally from the folks in Newton, and also a discussion on the process for authorizing funding in future years of the TIP for those kinds of ongoing shuttle pilots prioritization and performance measures. If we go on to the next slide, please, I'd like to provide an overview on what shuttle pilot projects are in the Community Connections program. Starting off on the next slide with really a step back and what the Community Connections program is. The Community Connections program represents a first and last mile connectivity program that functions as one of the 6 MPO investment programs. The chart shown on screen, specifically the lavender part in the top left, illustrates how the target allocation is at 2% of overall regional target funding for the MPO. This effectively leads to a target allocation of $2.5 million a year based on current funding levels. The federal funding used for most Community Connections projects is known as CMAQ, which is Congestion Mitigation Air Quality Funding, which, as the name suggests, is intended to support activities that improve air quality. For example, reducing greenhouse gas emissions. For Community Connections, some projects that may be funded through the program would be bus lanes, transit signal priority, bike racks and lanes, bike share, and shuttle pilots. At the March 2nd meeting, we will also be discussing some of the projects that were applied for under this category of funding. But here, the shuttle pilot projects will really be the focus of this presentation. Going on to the next slide, please. For those of you who were at the previous board meeting, there was a discussion around scoring criteria. So this table may look familiar. This table shows the 6 evaluation criteria that community connections projects are put up against, being connectivity, coordination, plan implementation, transportation equity, mode shift, and fiscal sustainability. These criteria are not only critical to project evaluation and ensuring that projects demonstrate a benefit to air quality, but also this discussion today, where we're going to be discussing how the MPO evaluates the performance of projects that may be in their 2nd or 3rd year of shuttle operations and are therefore seeking additional funding to ensure fiscal sustainability and any improvements for the continued operation of their programs. Going on to the next slide, we can talk about what specific shuttle projects are included in the TIP. As you can see here, there are 8 shuttle projects currently being funded through the fiscal years 23 to 7 TIP, many of which are seeking additional funding in 24 and 25. Some of the proponents for these shuttles range from partners at RTAs like CATA, Metro West RTA, and also the Montechusett RTA, and also municipalities. You can see that there's Canton, the Royal Street Shuttle, which I'll be speaking more to shortly. There are 2 in Newton, both for NUMO, Newton's micro transit service, and also a service expansion line item in Newton. And then the Stoneham Shuttle in Stoneham and Watertown's Pleasant Street shuttle service expansion. I've highlighted the Royal Street Shuttle just for reference, so you can see that it's currently funded for fiscal year 2023 at $177,000, and in fiscal 24 is seeking an additional $148,000. Should all of these shuttles be approved for continued funding, the bottom line there in light blue shows the amount of remaining Community Connections Program funding that is available for new projects for programming in this year's cycle of fiscal year 24 and 25. As mentioned, there's $2.5 million available as balance really targeted for the Community Connections Program. And should ongoing shuttle obligations be satisfied, that final figure there represents how much is left for anything that may be coming in that is new. It's $641,000 in availability for 24 and $1 million for 25. This will come up again as we have discussions about how projects scored and programming scenarios in the coming MPO meetings. Without further ado, I'd like to go on to the next slide and the slide after to really provide an overview on the Royal Street Shuttle. I'd like to thank the Neponset Valley Transportation Management Association for providing these slides to me here. If we go on to the next slide, we can really begin looking at the ridership trends for this shuttle. The purpose of the Royal Street Shuttle really is connectivity between major rapid transit hubs in the Boston area, including Red Line stations in Mattapan, Ashmont Station, commuter rail stations in the southern area of the Boston region, and connecting them with major business and office developments along Royal Street in Canton, near Interstate 93 at the interchange down there. As you can see here, the ridership for the Royal Street commuter shuttle varies significantly throughout the year. One of the key considerations here about these kinds of commuter shuttles is the fact that these shuttles operate to serve an ever-changing environment of commercial employment. Key consideration here, as we all know, is that with hybrid work emerging as part of the pandemic, there's been significant shifts in the amount of people going into the office on a given day and at different parts of the year as different spikes have emerged. This helps to explain some of the variability in ridership, but I think the critical trend to analyze here is that for calendar year 2022, there is a clear and distinct increase in ridership moving between January and then December. And of course, in the holiday season, this ridership tends to taper off because seasonal ridership fluctuations can be expected with these kinds of services. Similarly, on the next slide, we can see another shuttle that operates in the area, which is the Points 32 Health commuter shuttle. Points 32 Health is one of the business partners that exists along this corridor. And when combining shuttle ridership for both the Royal Street Shuttle, which is MPO funded, and this other sort of supplementary Points 32 Health commuter shuttle, you can see that there's fairly strong combined and consistent ridership across the entirety of the calendar year, roughly ranging around 270 up to 466 persons, with the lowest ridership months, as can be expected, being in the winter months. Moving on to the next slide, You can see the capacity and ridership projections that help to drive how the shuttles may be evaluated for further years of funding. These would be bus sizes that are variable based on the nature of the shuttle that's being operated. So you can see here that Royal Street runs 2 shuttles with 2 separate capacities and different round trip frequency rates. These shuttles connect with different stations. So one may go connect to Red Line stations to provide that kind of last mile connection, and another may provide service to a commuter rail station. I should note as well that the Royal Street Shuttle is not the only transit service that is offered between stations in Mattapan and also Royal Street. The MBTA operates bus 716 through the corridor. However, these shuttles specifically operate at times that are intended to connect people with places of employment at major commuting hours, namely those kinds of anywhere from 7 to 9 and 3 to 7 o'clock in the evening to match commuting times. Estimated ridership for these shuttles is roughly represented by about 50% of total capacity. A rider may pay, if they are not part of an employer that is a partner, $2 to board the shuttle and receive this kind of rapid service between those 2 stations. If a rider is an employee of these business partners, which we'll get to on a later slide, then they may be able to use it for free. Moving on to the next slide. In October of 2022, the Neponset Valley TMA conducted a ridership satisfaction survey with its current ridership and received 26 respondents. The information that will appear on these coming slides help to really paint a picture of how the post-COVID-19 and really ongoing pandemic environment has changed the nature of work and therefore how commuter shuttles can operate. There's very positive feedback from these responses, but we can really dig deeper on the next slide on some of the specific answers here. So starting off, we can see the response rates as to whether or not a respondent had used the shuttle and which shuttle they may have used over the past year. The 0.32 health shuttle being a primary driver, but also the Royal Street Shuttle for the Red Line and commuter rail, representing a significant cross-section of all ridership. You can also see below, which I think is a very important figure, is really how hybrid work schedules have impacted ridership. As you can see, the strongest respondent category for the question of how often do you use the 0.32 employee shuttle or Royal Street shuttles really reflects that kind of hybrid scheduling, where the largest group at 34.78% uses it 1 to 2 times a week, with 2 to 3 times a week coming in at 17.39, and then every day being only 13.04%. The less effective few times a month, I should say, category represents 21.7% of overall ridership, but may not be exclusive to those other responses. If we go on to the next slide, we can really kind of see this be reflected in terms of the days that an individual works in the office. As you can see here, many respondents are not working 5 days a week. You can see that on Mondays, there is some of the Mondays and Fridays really being some of the lowest responsiveness, 4 days worked in the office, with Tuesdays and Thursdays being higher. I believe this data reflects a shift in the hybrid work schedule. And you can also see here really a split, whether or not the days that an individual works in the office varies week to week. There's a little bit of a split response rate here with 10 to 15 either way. Moving on to the next slide, we can talk about where these riders are coming from and where they are going. Circumstances along Royal Street have changed since the shuttle was initially applied for, with different tenants and partners coming and going with these operations, but also additional prospective partners in these operations emerging, such as Trillium Brewery in Canton, which is a new establishment also located within the shuttle's operational area. You can see that Dunkin' Brands was one of the original partners, which has since moved out. Boston Mutual Life Insurance Company, Good Baby International, the town of Canton, and then also the new partners being 0.32 Health and also Campanelli. I should mention as well that because of changes with the commercial partners, some of the rates of occupancy at some of the target commercial developments, these kinds of office campuses and office parks, are also lower than full capacity. Some of these office buildings, because of COVID and because of shifts in the commercial environment and office spaces, are at 50% of their overall tenancy capacity. And of course, as potential partners move in, they will be targeted for potential inclusion in the operation of these services. As mentioned, one being Trillium Brewery in Canton, 0.32 Health may expand its footprint, and any other partners in that area. I believe Reebok was one major consideration at one point, but had since moved on. another impact on service projections. And again, the Neponset Valley TMA has also identified future shuttle partners. On the next slide, you can see that the list that I just mentioned is absolutely not comprehensive. Here you can see additional partners, including Trillium, Amazon, partners for hotels for connectivity to rapid transit service downtown, other institutions like Meditech, Blue Hills Common. I should also mention too that the Royal Street is also in proximity to the Blue Hills itself, so it may also have additional opportunities provided to different users. Moving on to the next slide, this really gets into what the MPO is doing to support this operation. So on this slide, you can see really the financial breakdown year to year that is projected by the Neponset Valley TMA. The obligation of funding through the MPO is reflected on the first red line on that table, which is being dubbed the workforce grant. You can see that year one, the MPO provided funding of $209,000, two of $177,000, and a projection for year three of $148,000. This reflects a total operating cost projection of about $340,000 a year for the shuttle, indicating that the MPO with these kinds of shuttle projects really obligates about 50% of the overall funding to run the shuttle, with major corporate partners picking up the rest of it. I should also mention too, that as the shuttle increases its ridership, and also as these shuttles really mature in their operations, the MPO's funding after the third year, by nature of a pilot program, is no longer applicable to be used. And instead, these private partners take on more of the burden for operating the shuttles. And also, even during the pilot period, as you can see, the funding obligations required of the MPO decrease. You can also see that the municipal partner, being the town of Canton, also pitches in some money to support. Now, going on to the next slide. This slide basically just contextualizes the location of this operation. This is where the Royal Street shuttle really operates. Royal Street shown as that side office access road really off of 93. And you can see the myriad number of parking lots, office spaces, parks, campuses, etc. that operate in that area. I believe not included there. Oh, no, that's actually included. Yeah, this is a most up-to-date satellite photo. I was looking to make sure that it reflected some of the new developments going in through there. With that, we can move on to the next slide. I would like to mention that there is significant local support for these projects, including multiple letters of support that have been submitted, not only by the Neponset Valley TMA, but also the town of Canton and its partners throughout the Royal Street corridor, including some of the corporate partners for the operations of the shuttles to continue the MPO's financial support for the Royal Street shuttle. If we go on the next slide, this just shows some of the additional connections that can be made throughout the corridor, along with different kinds of shuttles operated by the Neponset Valley TMA, some of which have intersections with additional MPO projects and priorities, like the University Avenue shuttle, which is near Canton Street in Westwood. Now, with that, the Neponset Valley TMA, if we go on to the next slide, is requesting that the MPO and its partners provide additional support and votes to approve a second year of funding for the Royal Street project. There will not be a vote conducted at the end of this presentation. That will be discussed at a future meeting. But should you have any questions for the Neponset Valley TMA, if you go on to the next slide, you can reach out to Karen Demain. She is the TMA's director, and then also Jean Manning, the economic development and interim town planner for the town of Canton, to answer any further questions. With that, I believe per the request of City of Newton, wanted to give them some opportunity to speak to their project, if that's okay, Mr. Chair.
Sure, Ethan, but first I'd like to ask you to do something for me.
Sure.
How many people rode the Royal Street shuttle last year?
If we could go back real quick to slide 70.
Thank you.
You can see here that ridership began in January at about 58 and then tapered off to around 179 by end of year. I'm trying to think about this off the top of my head, and I will get back to you with firm numbers on this. But my recollection is that a majority of this ridership is returning ridership. I believe approximately 40% of the ridership also claims that they would not be able to make this trip without using an automobile to do so, or alternative service.
So and these are actual numbers?
These are actuals.
So we gave 27 people 178 rides, and how much did it cost us?
Based on the funding in the first year, it was $208,000 in fiscal year 23. For fiscal 24, it's a projection of 177,000. And then for fiscal year 25, it would be for, I believe, approximately 148, if I'm recalling that off the top of my head correctly. That's also daily ridership, I should mention, not monthly, but.
Right, so. Okay, so, but it says monthly on it. It says 178 people, 178 rides a month. That's very important to me.
Yeah, I can follow up with that. I'll get additional information from the TMA to clarify on that.
Yeah, I'm so just so everybody understands the reason this is on here is because we went to FHWA and asked them to obligate second year funding. They looked at the ridership and the cost per rider and said, "Are you sure? We will let you do it, but you've got to tell us you really want it done." I said to them, "It's MPO funding. I'd like to talk to the MPO and make sure the MPO still supports it." I'm not saying we shouldn't, okay? I didn't want to take the position that it was MassDOT's job to say this is a good shuttle or a bad shuttle, and please excuse the shorthand, okay? I don't really mean bad and good, you know, I just don't speak well. But people need to figure this out so we can have a vote next week and I can get this obligated and give this shuttle this money or not, as the case may be. Eric, and we will get to Newton in a second. Eric?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, Ethan, to David's question, I think it's very important to understand, is this monthly or daily ridership? If it's monthly ridership, assuming it's running like 5 days a week, right? Dividing those numbers by, say, 20 days a month, you've got a handful of people riding it every day, even though there might be, and then, given that the fact that the survey indicates that people aren't riding every day. So I think understanding that daily ridership is very important, per David's point about what is the sort of like the cost per rider, implications there. So if we could get that information, in advance of the next time we discuss this, would be really good.
Right, so Karen Demain is actually here. If you know that answer and want to answer it now, we can call on you. But if not, and you want to talk to us next month about this, that's totally fine too. I don't want to surprise anybody. But if you want to talk about it today, please raise your hand and we will call on you. Brian? Oh wait, Brian, Karen, thank you.
Sorry about that. I hadn't. I do want to just emphasize the fact that these shuttles have only been in service not even a full year. One of the shuttles was launched in November of 2021, and the other was launched basically in April of 22. These are unprecedented times during a hybrid work time. And I would like to, where many of these businesses are, just going back 2 and 3 days a week. So if I could just put my thoughts together, and I will definitely address this for the next time.
Yeah, and again, to be clear, the fact that something is underperforming, like I'm going to say underperforming, but
this is strong. This is a strong ridership, honestly.
Right. And this is a 1-year ridership, year 1 ridership, and there may be reasons why year 2 will get improvements to all the things Ethan said. But Ethan, I need the MPO just to have some basic facts, okay?
And
right?
there's
go ahead, Karen. I'm sorry.
There is strong potential for growth in this area. This is located in a major hub with access to 128, 95, and Route 24, and along Route 138. There is a strong, definite opportunities. And again, some of these businesses are not fully occupied at this moment, but are definitely moving forward. So I definitely know that this is a solid project that will definitely be improving and consistent going forward.
But so, Karen, are these monthly numbers on this slide?
Yes.
Thank you. Brian?
Well, I echo what you said, David. Need lots of more information on this, specifically cost per rider, cost per trip. I mean, we can debate whether these are strong ridership numbers or not, but I guess my question to you, David, would be playing out this hypothetical scenario in my head. If, say, we chose not to fund year 2, what could we do with those dollars?
Well, theoretically, it's available for community connections grants, but I don't know whether there will be, assuming we want to keep the $2.5 million for community connections, it would go into that pot for grants to additional community connection program projects. Theoretically, if there's not enough need to spend the 2.5, it becomes available for whatever else the NPO wants to program. But again, it is small money, okay? It's not small money to a normal person, but it's $177,000. So there's not a lot that.
Well, just to follow up, are there other community connections projects that we think hypothetically could use another $177,000? I just don't want to be in the position where we say to Neponset Valley, we're done, but then have nothing to use the money for. I mean,
Right.
if we believe in this thing, and many of us do, then we should invest in it. But maybe if there's something that needs more investment, that's worth considering as well. You know what I'm saying?
Yes, but I would have to rely on Ethan for that. Ethan, do you manage the community connections program? Because I say I have to rely on you. There may be another person I have to rely on for that answer.
There are a few of us that work on community connections at the MPO. I work on it with my colleague Logan Casey. We are both coming up to speed on as far as where we intend to take the program. We also work with the board on that and coordinate with MAPC on matters related to bike share as well, given how the contracts are administered. But for shuttles, that usually goes through my colleague Logan and I. We also work with, of course, your team at OTP on those discussions too regarding performance data.
Yep. Any other questions? Karen, do you have anything else you want to say this time? This will be an agenda item for next month, and we will give you a lot of time. In 2 weeks, we're coming back to talk about this again and possibly take a vote on it. If you want to have your own presentation or your own time to speak, then we will give it to you. But do you have anything you want to say today to wrap up?
Thank you. I do feel this is a strong project and it will grow as we get more businesses on board, as well as more employees are going back to the offices. This is going to 4 transit hubs. This is going to Quincy Adams, Ashmont, Mattapan, and the Route 128 commuter rail Amtrak station. I see the growth in the business, and we don't have enough time to prove success. The shuttles have not been on the road, not even a year.
Thank you.
So I appreciate your time, everyone. Thank you so much, and I really hope you'll give us some support.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Newton? David Cousins.
Okay, I'm not sure if Nicole's on this call. I don't see her. And I have not worked on Numo at all or prepared anything, but I'm happy to speak to what I do know. I know that ridership has met the projections and is growing. The ridership, the whole system's expanding in terms of the number of vehicles and the number of electric vehicles, and the number of unique riders continues to grow. I know that it's being used by a variety of different people, seniors, a lot of seniors, which we expected, quite a few high school students to get around, which I think maybe we didn't expect that as much. Just a wide variety of different markets. And you see the vehicles all over the city with their distinct sort of logo. So I think people are just talking about Numo and trying it out more. I believe the first 5 rides are free if you're a new user. So people are seeing it, promoting the service. It's definitely filling a niche, in terms of the last mile or just getting around for people who don't have other options or who don't want to drive. So I think it's a good example of how the MPO could help a program get off the ground, right? Which could grow and become successful if you have the demand and if you have the right marketing, which I think is really critical, and a way to fund it, of course. So I guess I don't know what else to say. Just a big thank you to the MPO for creating the program and for funding it. Oh, and I see Josh is here. Very good. Thank you.
Josh Ostrov.
Thank you so much, David, and both Davids. So just to add a little bit, yeah, Nicole Friedman was my predecessor in transportation planning in Newton, and I've been here since January. It's really something Nicole was just pivotal in setting up, but I know she has a lot of other demands on her time and may not be able to join us today. But I want to just amplify what David Kosas has said. Numo recently surpassed 100,000 riders a few weeks ago. It is in the range of 3,000 rides per week. It has been enormously successful. Demand is outstripping supply. One of the things that we've been able to do is by working with VIA, the provider, is to keep wages on track so that we aren't seeing driver shortages. But even still, we could definitely expand. We've got 9 vehicles on the road now. If we had 10 or 11, then we'd be able to provide the level of service. But I foresee it moving forward with changes in bus service in Newton, and with the nature of Newton being, far-flung villages. We need this kind of decentralized public transit model to adequately serve folks. So, there's really 3 categories. It started out as a senior shuttle, and it's still enormously important there. It definitely is serving kids, particularly where we don't have enough formalized after-school transportation. And then it's critical for workforce transit. We're able to get it. We were able to stand it up with state grants, including community connections funding, and with a small amount of city funding, and then with mitigation fees negotiated with developers. But those, that latter is not necessarily sustainable. We're always able to leverage it when new mixed-use development or multifamily development comes in, to have them pay in as opposed to having a dedicated shuttle. But that's not, the way we can reliably maintain microtransit in Newton. So we are very grateful for the MPO's support on this. Happy to field whatever questions we can, but very grateful for your consideration at the next meeting, or now, if you want to advance it.
Any questions for Newton from the MPO members? Brian Kane.
Thank you, David, and thank you. Hello, Josh, and thank you, other David. I guess I would just ask that the same metrics that we're asking for Royalston Street be provided here. Total number of trips, cost per trip, all that good stuff, so that we can do a like with like comparison. I think it's important that we judge these things against similar metrics, and also against what said they would do in their application. So if, Ethan, I don't know if you're listening still, but if something like that could be brought forward, I would appreciate it. Thank you.
I'd be happy to put something together.
Thank you. Any other questions? Susan Barrett.
Hi there. Thank you so much. So I have a number of questions. One is, I guess, to echo Brian, I'd love to know kind of rides per vehicle hour, cost per vehicle hour. The last time I saw those numbers, it was averaging about 2.2 people per vehicle hour. And my understanding of microtransit or any demand response service is it doesn't scale, right? The more demand you have, the more vehicles you have. That said, I'm not anti-microtransit or anti-demand response. I just think that's something we have to understand. I'm also curious, as these microtransit models continue to proliferate and the interest in them proliferates, how does that jive with our TNC law? My understanding is microtransit is considered a TNC. It gets that TNC fee. So, and the whole point of the TNC legislation was to reduce the negative impacts of TNCs. Obviously, there are positive impacts, as you know, Josh pointed to some positive uses of this, but I think, again, we need to think very holistically. In other meetings I've been to, I've pleaded with the MPO, can we please do some true, honest to goodness, holistic thinking of our transportation services, where let's think, proactively, futuristically, ideally, where do we want our fixed route service, at what frequency, and then what do we do to fill in the gaps? Let's have a holistic integration of that. And then when I think about these demand services, again, one of the charts I saw when Nicole did do a presentation, it was maybe to the transit working group. Some of the people who were now riding Numo were people who would have walked, biked, taken the MBTA or taken the ride. And now it's not a bad thing that they're now on a new service, but then again, I just think that points to the need to think more holistically. And in regards to demand response services, I've really been wanting to think about how can we integrate the Executive Office of Health and Human Services demand services with our paratransit services, and then with all these other sort of community run demand services, COA, or like this, because maybe, again, I do understand the need for demand services, but can we find a more holistic integration of all of this? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Susan. Any other comments or questions at this time? So just so I can frame this for everybody, going forward, in order to get year 2 funding, Community Connection Shuttles will make a presentation to the NPO showing all those metrics that Brian has asked us for, and whatever other presentation they want to make that seems valuable, right? Like if there are, there's a reason you think your ridership is going to grow, but we're going to actually look at how each shuttle is performing and take votes on second year funding rather than just automatically roll it over. Okay. Any other questions or comments? Seeing none. Thank you, Ethan. Next item on the agenda, I believe, is member items. Are there any? Dennis, Jean, Betty.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to see if there's an appetite to have a future agenda item to discuss possibly returning to in-person hybrid meetings in portion some of our meetings or all of them, and kind of just to get an idea of a discussion about the potential of doing that. I think it's worthy of discussion, and just hoping that we can have some sort of future discussion in agenda item. Thank you.
We will try to put it on an agenda item in the coming month or two, depending on how it can squeeze in with the tip. But yes, we should discuss it, and we will put it on the agenda. Thank you, Dennis.
Thank you.
Lynn Diggins.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And Brian is after me. So anyway, I have a request of you, and not so much for an agenda item, but maybe a memo or something to maybe tell us, inform us about the use of debt, and how maybe it is calculated, or how we calculate the prudent use of it. Because, for example, I could see the money that we use for the debt being advantageous because we got more money for more bang for the buck, for lack of a better phrase, when we took out those scans, a decade or so ago at very low interest rates versus having that money now. So I just want to get some input. Like I say, it could just be a memo from whomever informing us how those decisions are made about how much debt to take out, and perhaps the benefits or the disadvantages of doing so. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Lynn. Brian Kane.
Thanks, David. Just wanted to mention again a quick reminder. I asked last time about the possibility of moving from Thursday mornings, given that MassDOT and the team meet on those days. And I just wanted to remind you and everyone else that this is an issue, especially if we go to in-person or hybrid. It's going to get more of an issue. And so just, again, throwing it out there. Thank you.
Thank you, Brian. I will ask my staff to look at how it might be possible to change the timing of the MPO meeting, Boston MPO meeting, in relation to all the other MPO meetings that happen across the state, because much like the conflict with MassDOT and MBTA board meetings, it's hard for me and my staff if we have conflicting MPO meetings. But let us look at it and come back to the MPO, because I do take your point. There's a lot of things discussed at MassDOT and MBTA board meetings that people on this call may want to be at. So let me look at something, and then we'll put it back on a future agenda. Anything else? Seeing none, can I get a motion in a second to adjourn this meeting? Eric Barassa.
Mr. Chair, I'll make a motion to adjourn.
Lynn Diggins.
I'll second that motion.
Without objection, we are adjourned. Thank you all very much.